let's begin our discussion of the story of an hour. Let's read the first paragraph here. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. So here we have a very short introduction, the short first paragraph. Let me finish what I think to be the introduction part, and then we can talk about it, okay? And then the second paragraph. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that reveal in half concealing. Her husband's friend Richard was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of, quote, killed, unquote. He had only taken in time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. Okay, let me read the third paragraph here. She did not hear the story as many women had heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with sudden, wild abandonment, in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. Okay, so these are the three paragraphs introducing what the story is about. Because of time is limited, so maybe let me just tell you a bit what you could, how you could possibly respond to it. Okay, for instance, here in the first paragraph, I guess the most important word here will be death. The news of her husband's death. Okay, so here, maybe you could pay attention to two details. One is that this Mrs. Mallard is one with a heart trouble, and then second is the story is about the news of her husband's death. Okay, so although the first paragraph is very short, it is very suggestive. It tells us right away, what the story is about. Okay, and the second paragraph basically mentions two characters. One is Josephine, and the other is Richards. Both are like friends and narratives around the Mallard family. Okay. So the sister tells her the news in broken sentences, with veiled hints that reveal in half concealing. Now there is this contradiction here, reveal and concealing. This is like when you want to tell a person that you don't love her, then you say, 我真的很喜欢你耶. Okay, so here you conceal the fact that you don't love her, but when you say that, 我真的很喜欢你耶, then it's implied that I like you but I don't love you. Okay, so this is an example I can find, which is kind of similar to this one. Of course, the news here is sadder because it's about death. It's not just about love. It's about life and death. And then what is interesting about this phrase is that it not only has two verbs which are contradictory to each other, 互相矛盾, it also has the noun hints, added with veiled. Hint already is not a clear revelation. 暗示，对不对？已经是暗示了，它还要暗示，前面还要加一个遮盖的暗示。My Chinese is not good, but I think the complexity of this phrase, suggests to us the really the extraordinary care with which Josephine reveals the news, because they think that she's weak. She has heart trouble, so they don't want her to receive a sudden blow. So they try to be tender with her. The same thing with what happened to Richard. Now, Richard was the one to get the news, get the intelligence at the newspaper office. And the way he got it was that he saw the list of the killed or casualties, and Mr. Mallard was on it and on top of it. Okay, so he tried to reconfirm the news, and then rush to the Mallard house, to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. With the same purpose of trying to protect Mrs. Mallard. Okay, less careful, less tender friend would maybe just rush in and tell her, "Oh, your husband is dead." Okay, and then that would be too sudden, too much of a blow to Mrs. Mallard. Okay, so that's how in this paragraph, there is an emphasis on the care with which the friend and relative try to protect her against the tremendous impact of these steps. Of course, when we know that our loved one is dead, we will be very sad. Okay, and let's take a look at how Mrs. Mallard responds to it. Okay, she did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. Now, this actually could be a typical response, because it's too sudden. Sometimes it's so sudden. The news is so sudden that we just cannot take it. We cannot believe in it. Okay, so that's a natural response. But Mrs. Mallard seemed to be stronger in her reception of the news, because she takes it. She doesn't want to resist it. Later on, you will be reading a story about a woman called Emily. She is one example of the person who refuses to take death, who refuses to accept the death of maybe her father, etc. Okay, and this is one of the natural responses we could have, but not Mrs. Mallard. She takes it. Okay, and then she wept at once. So immediately she, although the family, the friends thought that she's weak, but she actually knows how to express her emotions. She wept at once with sudden, wild abandonment. She doesn't repress herself. In other words, she cried right on the moment. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. Okay, so she stayed in the room alone. What is very interesting, or the focus of this story, is what she experiences in her room. And then the experience of that room, the middle part of the story, is followed by another revelation at the end of the story. I'm not going to tell you what happened, okay? And then you'll be able to find that, she goes through two sudden changes, and the two sudden changes said a lot about women's position in the late 19th century. This story is written in the late 19th century. It's not the story about our world. It's late 19th century in the United States and in the southern part of the United States. Okay, so the background of the story also kind of determines what happens. Okay, before we move on to the middle part, let me ask you this. What do you think about her responses here? Do you find it natural, or just from this paragraph, the third paragraph, can you tell what kind of woman she is? Would you do the same? Like if it happened that the most dearly person, the most dearly loved person dies, would you prefer to be by yourself, or would you prefer to stay with your family or your friends, etc.? Let me give an example. Some of you may know it. In the English department, last summer, one of our alumni passed away by drowning, and it was really sudden. And in the United States, in Yellowstone Park. And one thing very touching about the whole thing is that at her funeral, a lot of her classmates went. And then they hugged each other. And it seems similarly to suggest that at this moment of death, the mutual support, the love the classmates show to one another is the most important thing. Because the class lost one person, so the rest of them stuck together. They felt more closely to each other. Okay, but Mrs. Maller, she doesn't do that. She doesn't stick to her sister more closely. She goes into her room. So could you try to guess what kind of person she is? I know that you only read 3 paragraphs, so maybe it's hard for you to judge. But sometimes if you are brave enough to make guesses, then you learn more from your reading. Sometimes like me, I might be too concerned with correct reading, so I would hesitate to talk about my first responses. But first responses usually is very important. Yeah, so anybody?
I think it's kind of weird because like you said earlier on, people normally turn to each other for support and consolation when a common loved one dies. And you can see that she's not going into her room to be alone because she's afraid of showing her emotions because she broke down into her sister's arms. So maybe she has some other emotion other than grief, because maybe she didn't get along with her husband, so maybe she hates him or something. Yeah.
This is another good guess. Indeed, this is where either in the first reading or the second reading, we need to be careful about. We need to collect clues, 线索. And then, indeed, in the first 3 paragraphs, there is an obvious contradiction. Like what Darren said, she seems to be quite strong and independent. But then the other people think that she's weak. So that's a kind of contradiction we'll have to deal with. And at this point, you as a reader, can ask question of the text. Why? Why does she go into her room alone? Why doesn't she receive like consolation from her family members? And then Susan's guess is a good guess. I'm not saying that there are problems in between the husband and wife, but there are problems. Okay, but it's not really like they hate each other. Not this type of problem. There is another type of problem that you can see.